I never expected to find myself in this mess. One minute I was living the American dream, successful career, handsome husband, and a life that seemed picture perfect. Now I'm sitting in my parents' guest room, wondering where it all went wrong. My name is Emily, and this is how my fairy tale turned into a nightmare. It all started 5 years ago at a friend's barbecue. I was 30, focused on my marketing career, and not looking for love. Then Ethan walked in. "Emily, have you met Ethan?" My friend Sarah's voice cut through the chatter. "He's the architect who designed that new art museum downtown." I turned and found myself face to face with the most captivating man I'd ever seen. Tall, with piercing blue eyes and a smile that could melt ice, Ethan extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Emily," he said, his voice smooth as silk. I fumbled with my drink, nearly spilling it. "Oh, nice to meet you, too." We talked for hours that night. Ethan was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in my work. I couldn't believe someone like him would give me a second glance. "You're different from the other women I've met," he told me as the party wound down. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" I said yes, of course. Who wouldn't? Our whirlwind romance was the stuff of movies. Fancy restaurants, weekend getaways, and surprise gifts became the norm. My friends were green with envy. "Girl, you hit the jackpot," my coworker Jen gushed over lunch. "Ethan's like a real-life Prince Charming." I blushed, still not quite believing it myself. "I know, I'm so lucky." 6 months after we met, Ethan proposed. It was a crisp autumn evening in Central Park. He got down on one knee, pulled out a ring that probably cost more than my car, and asked me to be his wife. "Emily, you're the missing piece in my life," he said, his eyes shining. "Will you marry me?" I was so overwhelmed. I could barely squeak out a yes. Our wedding was small, but elegant. Ethan insisted on handling all the details, saying he wanted to make it perfect for me. As I walked down the aisle, I felt like I was floating on air. "You look stunning," Ethan whispered as I reached him at the altar. The reception was a blur of champagne toasts and well wishes. I caught snippets of conversation from the guests. How did plain Jane Emily land a catch like Ethan? She must have some hidden talents, if you know what I mean. I tried to ignore the whispers, focusing instead on my new husband's adoring gaze. As we settled into married life, I threw myself into being the perfect wife. I wanted to prove to everyone, including myself, that I deserved Ethan. But cracks started to appear in our fairy tale facade. It began with little things: a raised eyebrow at the state of the laundry, a sigh when dinner wasn't ready on time. "Emily, darling," Ethan said one evening, his tone deceptively light, "don't you think it's time you focused more on our home? Your career seems to be distracting you." I froze, spatula in hand. "What do you mean?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just saying, a wife's place is in the home. Don't you want to make me happy?" As I stood there, sauce bubbling on the stove, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in Ethan's voice made me wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. Little did I know, that moment was just the beginning of my descent into hell. Meeting Ethan's family was like stepping into another world. A world of polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and judgmental stares. I'll never forget that first dinner at their mansion. "Emily, dear, do come in," Sylvia, Ethan's mother, greeted me with air kisses. Her perfume was overpowering, her smile razor-sharp. "I hope you didn't have trouble finding us." I clutched my handbag, suddenly aware of its worn edges. "No, not at all. Your home is beautiful." Ian, Ethan's father, merely grunted from behind his newspaper. Ethan's sister, Kathy, bounded down the stairs, all smiles and designer clothes. "Emily, I'm so glad to finally meet you," she exclaimed, hugging me tightly. "Ethan's told us so much about you." Dinner was a minefield of potential faux pas. I watched Sylvia's eyes narrow as I reached for the wrong fork, heard her tsk when I accidentally clinked my water glass. "So, Emily," Sylvia began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "Ethan tells us you work in advertising, was it?" "Marketing, actually," I corrected gently. "I'm an executive at—" "Oh, how quaint," she interrupted. "I always admire women who choose to work, though I'm sure you'll want to focus on family soon enough." I felt my cheeks burn. "Well, Mother," Ethan cut in smoothly, "Emily's quite successful in her field. I'm very proud of her accomplishments." Sylvia's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. As weeks passed, the pressure to fit into Ethan's world grew. Sylvia's helpful suggestions became a constant barrage. "Emily, darling, you simply must let me introduce you to my stylist," she'd say, eyeing my off-the-rack dress. Or, "I've enrolled you in my favorite cooking class. Every wife should know how to prepare a proper soufflé." I tried to take it in stride, but each comment chipped away at my confidence. Kathy, surprisingly, became my ally. "Don't let Mom get to you," she whispered one day as we helped clear the table. "She's just set in her ways." I smiled gratefully. "Thanks, Kathy. I'm trying, but sometimes I feel like I'll never measure up." She squeezed my arm. "Just be yourself. That's who Ethan fell in love with, right?" But even as Kathy reassured me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was constantly being evaluated, found wanting. Things came to a head at Sylvia's annual charity gala. I'd spent weeks preparing, determined to make a good impression, but as I descended the grand staircase, I heard the whispers. "Is that Ethan's wife? In that dress?" She looks so common. I froze, my confidence evaporating. Ethan appeared at my side, his smile tight. "Everything all right, dear?" he murmured. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As we made our rounds, I felt Sylvia's disapproving gaze following me. Later, as I fumbled through small talk with Ethan's business associates, I overheard Sylvia speaking to a friend. "Yes, Emily's nice enough, but between you and me, I had hoped Ethan would choose someone more suitable for our circle." My heart sank. I excused myself and fled to the powder room, fighting back tears. As I stared at my reflection, I wondered if I'd ever belong in this world. A soft knock startled me. "Emily?" It was Kathy. "Are you okay?" I opened the door, my carefully applied makeup smeared. Kathy's eyes widened. "Oh, honey," she sighed, pulling me into a hug. "Don't let them get to you. They're all snobs anyway." I pulled back, wiping my eyes. "How do you stand it?" Kathy's smile turned bitter. "Years of practice. But listen, Emily, you don't have to change who you are for them. For anyone." As we rejoined the party, Ethan caught my eye from across the room. His brow furrowed in concern, but he made no move to come to me. In that moment, surrounded by glittering wealth and barely concealed disdain, I realized I was utterly alone in this new life I'd chosen. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. The alarm blared at 5 a.m., jolting me awake. Another day of juggling work and home life stretched before me. I tiptoed out of bed, careful not to wake Ethan, and headed to the kitchen. By 6:30, I'd prepared Ethan's favorite breakfast, ironed his shirts, and was reviewing notes for my big presentation. As I sipped my coffee, Ethan sauntered in, frowning at the table. "No fresh squeezed orange juice?" he asked, his tone sharp. I froze. "I'm sorry, I forgot. I'll run to the store." "Never mind," he cut me off. "I'll grab something at the office." As he left, I felt a familiar knot in my stomach. When had I become so afraid of disappointing him? At work, I threw myself into my presentation, pushing aside my morning's troubles. Just as I was wrapping up, my phone buzzed. "Ethan. Emily, we need to talk. Come home early." My heart raced as I drove home, imagining worst-case scenarios. Had I forgotten an important event? Was Ethan sick? I found him in the living room, pacing. "Sit down," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "What's wrong?" I asked, perching on the edge of the sofa. Ethan took a deep breath. "I think it's time you quit your job." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? But why?" "Our home life is suffering, Emily. The house is a mess. Meals are rushed. And frankly, I'm tired of eating takeout when my wife should be cooking." I stared at him, stunned. "But my career, I've worked so hard. Don't you think our marriage is more important?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Or are you saying you care more about your job than me?" "No, of course not," I stammered. "But can't we find a balance? Maybe hire some help?" Ethan scoffed. "And admit we can't manage our own home? What would people think?" As we argued, I felt my dreams slipping away. Finally, exhausted, I agreed to think about it. The next few weeks were a blur of increased household responsibilities and mounting pressure at work. I'd wake at 4 a.m. to clean, cook elaborate meals, and still try to meet my deadlines. One evening, as I rushed to prepare dinner after a long day, disaster struck. The roast burned, filling the kitchen with smoke. Ethan stormed in, waving his arms. "What's going on? Can't you do anything right?" Tears stung my eyes as I tried to salvage the meal. "I'm sorry, I got caught up with work and... work again?" Ethan's voice dripped with disdain. "If you can't handle both, maybe it's time to make a choice." I turned to face him, anger finally bubbling up. You knew who I was when you married me, Ethan. My career is part of who I am." His expression hardened. "Well, maybe I thought you'd grow up and realize what's truly important." As we glared at each other, the doorbell rang. Ethan's parents. "What's that smell?" Sylvia asked as she swept in, wrinkling her nose. I wanted to sink into the floor. There was an accident with dinner." Sylvia clicked her tongue. "Oh, Emily, how do you expect to be a proper wife if you can't even manage a simple meal?" I looked to Ethan, hoping he'd defend me. But he just shook his head, disappointment clear in his eyes. That night, lying awake, I replayed every criticism, every disapproving look. When had I become this shadow of myself, constantly seeking approval? My phone lit up with a text from my boss. "Great job on the Henderson account. You're on track for that promotion." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep living like this, torn between two worlds, never good enough for either. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I wouldn't quit my job, but I knew this choice would come at a cost. The question was I ready to pay it? I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my once vibrant smile had faded to a weary line. This was the cost of trying to be everything to everyone. "Emily," Ethan's voice boomed from downstairs, "where's my blue tie? I have an important meeting." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and plastered on a smile. "Coming, dear." As I helped Ethan with his tie, he frowned at me. "You look tired. Are you still working on that project? I thought we agreed you'd cut back your hours." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just didn't sleep well." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Make sure you're home early today. My parents are coming for dinner." My stomach dropped. "But I have a presentation." "Figure it out," he snapped. "Family comes first, remember?" After he left, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. How could I possibly manage everything? As I scrolled through my phone, a text from my boss popped up. "Emily, don't forget, big presentation today. This could lead to that promotion we discussed." Tears pricked my eyes. I'd worked so hard for this opportunity, but Ethan's demands echoed in my head. With shaking hands, I dialed my boss's number. "Janet, I'm so sorry, but I can't make the presentation today. Family emergency." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Janet spoke, her disappointment palpable. "I see. Well, I'll have Tom cover for you. We'll talk tomorrow." I spent the day in a frenzy, cleaning the house and preparing an elaborate meal. By the time Ethan's parents arrived, I was exhausted but determined to make everything perfect. Sylvia swept in, her critical gaze taking in every detail. "Oh, Emily," she sighed, running a finger along the mantel. "Dusting is really an everyday task, dear." I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. "You're right, Sylvia. I'll try to do better." Dinner was a minefield of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled criticisms. As I served dessert, my phone buzzed insistently. Excusing myself, I checked the message. "Emily, we need to talk first thing tomorrow. Janet." My heart sank. I knew what that meant. "Everything all right?" Ethan asked as I returned, his tone more accusatory than concerned. "Fine," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. After his parents left, Ethan cornered me in the kitchen. "What was that about?" "You were distracted all evening." I took a deep breath. "It was work. I missed an important presentation today." Ethan's face darkened. "Because of dinner? Emily, we talked about this, your priorities." "I know," I snapped, surprising us both. "I know what you think my priorities should be, but do you ever consider what I want?" "What you want," Ethan scoffed. "What about what this family needs? What I need from my wife?" As we argued, years of pent-up frustration poured out. Every criticism, every impossible expectation, every dream I'd sacrificed, it all came rushing to the surface. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm losing myself trying to be the person you want me to be." Ethan's expression hardened. "So what are you saying? That our marriage, our life together, isn't enough for you?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw not the charming man I'd fallen in love with, but a stranger who seemed to take pleasure in my struggle. "I'm saying I need to make a change," I replied, my voice stronger now. "For my own sanity." Ethan laughed coldly. "Good luck with that. You'd be nothing without me, Emily. Remember that." As he stormed out, leaving me alone in the kitchen, I felt something shift inside me. Fear, yes, but also a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Tomorrow, I decided, things would be different. I just had to find the courage to make it happen. The day after my argument with Ethan, I found myself at Sylvia's door, a basket of muffins in hand. It was her birthday, and despite everything, I was determined to make an effort. As I rang the doorbell, I steeled myself for the inevitable criticism. Sylvia opened the door, her perfectly coiffed hair and immaculate outfit making me feel frumpy in comparison. "Emily, dear," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How thoughtful of you to drop by." I followed her into the pristine living room, where she immediately began fussing with the curtains. "I hope these muffins aren't store-bought," she said, eyeing the basket suspiciously. "No, I baked them myself this morning," I replied, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. Sylvia raised an eyebrow. "Well, I suppose that's something. Though really, Emily, a woman in your position should be able to manage something a bit more sophisticated." I bit my tongue, reminding myself why I was here. "Sylvia, I was hoping we could talk. About Ethan, about our family." "Oh, yes," Sylvia interrupted, her tone sharpening. "Ethan called me last night. He was quite upset about your little outburst." My heart sank. Of course he had called his mother. "It wasn't an outburst," I said quietly. "I was just trying to express how I feel." Sylvia's laugh was like ice. "Feelings? My dear, marriage isn't about feelings. It's about duty, about maintaining appearances, something you seem to struggle with." As she continued to lecture me on the proper role of a wife, I felt a familiar sense of inadequacy creeping in. But then I remembered Ethan's cold words from the night before, and something inside me snapped. "Enough," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I didn't come here for a lecture, Sylvia. I came to try and understand, to find some common ground, but I see now that's impossible." Sylvia's eyes widened in shock. "Well, No, you never have," I continued, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. "You've never tried to understand me, to see me as anything more than an accessory for your son. But I'm a person, Sylvia, with dreams, with ambitions, and I'm done apologizing for that." As I spoke, I saw something flicker in Sylvia's eyes. Was it recognition, respect? But it was quickly replaced by her usual cold disdain. "If that's how you feel," she said icily, "perhaps it's time you reconsidered your place in this family." Her words hit me like a physical blow. "My place?" I repeated, stunned. "Yes, your place," Sylvia continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "Ethan comes from a long line of successful, respected individuals. We have standards to maintain. If you can't meet those standards, well..." She let the implication hang in the air. As I stared at her, I suddenly saw Ethan's behavior in a new light. The constant criticism, the impossible expectations, it all stemmed from here, from this woman who valued appearance over everything else. "You're right," I said, standing up. "I should reconsider my place, but not in the way you think." I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. "Thank you, Sylvia," I said, meeting her surprised gaze. "You've made things very clear." As I drove home, my mind raced. I thought about Ethan, about the life we'd built, about the woman I used to be, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself trying to fit into their world. Pulling into our driveway, I made a decision. It was time to reclaim my life, my identity. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. Ethan wouldn't let me go without a fight, and I had no illusions about the battles ahead. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the house, ready to face whatever came next. Because for the first time in years, I felt like myself again, and that was worth fighting for. The day Jess was born was the happiest of my life. As I held her tiny form in my arms, I felt a surge of love and protectiveness I'd never experienced before. Looking into her innocent eyes, I made a silent promise. I would shield her from the toxicity that had become my daily life. "She's perfect," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Ethan stood beside the hospital bed, his expression unreadable. "Let's hope she grows up to be a proper lady," he said, his tone oddly detached. I pushed aside the chill his words sent through me, focusing instead on Jess's tiny fingers wrapped around mine. She was my lifeline, my reason to keep going. As the months passed, I threw myself into motherhood with a passion that surprised even me. Every milestone, her first smile, her first steps, her first word, filled me with joy. For a while, it seemed like Jess's presence had softened Ethan. He doted on her, proudly showing off pictures to his colleagues. But as Jess grew older, I noticed a shift in Ethan's behavior. His critical nature, which had been somewhat subdued, began to resurface. The day Jess started kindergarten, I helped her get ready, my heart swelling with pride as she twirled in her new dress. "Mommy, look! I made this for Daddy!" Jess exclaimed, holding up a colorful drawing. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, smiling. "He'll love it." But when Ethan came home that evening, his reaction was far from what I'd hoped. "What's this mess?" he frowned, barely glancing at the artwork Jess thrust towards him. "I made it for you, Daddy," Jess said, her voice small. Ethan sighed. "Jess, if you're going to draw, at least try to stay inside the lines. This looks sloppy." I watched as Jess's face crumpled, my own heart breaking. "Ethan," I hissed, "she worked hard on that. She's only 5. He shot me a warning look. "We can't coddle her, Emily. She needs to learn to do things properly." That night, as I tucked Jess into bed, she looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy like my drawing?" I swallowed hard, fighting back my own tears. "Oh, sweetie, Daddy does like it. He just has a funny way of showing it sometimes." But as the weeks went by, Ethan's criticism of Jess became more frequent and harsh. Her artwork was never good enough, her grades could always be better, even her laugh was too loud. One afternoon, I picked Jess up from school to find her unusually quiet. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She hesitated before speaking. "Mrs. Thompson asked us to draw our families today." "That sounds nice," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Did you have fun?" Jess shook her head, her lower lip trembling. I didn't want to draw Daddy. Is that bad?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. I pulled the car over, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Turning to face Jess, I saw the fear and confusion in her eyes, the same look I'd seen in my own reflection countless times. In that moment, everything crystallized. I thought about the years of emotional manipulation I'd endured, the constant criticism, the slow erosion of my self-worth. And now, watching it happen to my daughter, something inside me snapped. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "It's not bad at all. In fact, I think it's time we made some changes." As we drove home, my mind raced. I knew what I had to do, but the thought terrified me. Leaving Ethan wouldn't be easy. He wouldn't let us go without a fight, and his family's influence was far-reaching. But looking at Jess in the mirror, seeing the spark that was slowly being extinguished, I knew I had no choice. For her sake, and for my own, I had to find the courage to break free. That night, as Ethan launched into another tirade about Jess's shortcomings, I felt something shift inside me. Enough was enough. Tomorrow, I decided, we would leave. I just prayed I'd have the strength to see it through. The morning I decided to leave Ethan dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. I'd spent the night packing essentials for Jess and me, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. As I made breakfast, trying to maintain an air of normalcy, Ethan entered the kitchen, his face thunderous. "Care to explain this?" he snarled, throwing a crumpled paper onto the counter. It was Jess's latest report card, all A's except for 1 B+. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "It's an excellent report card, Ethan. Jess should be proud." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Proud of mediocrity? That B+ is unacceptable." Something inside me snapped. "No, Ethan. What's unacceptable is how you treat our daughter, how you treat me." He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. "How dare you?" "No," I interrupted, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I'm done being silent. You've criticized and belittled us for years. I won't let you destroy Jess's self-esteem the way you destroyed mine." Ethan's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful." "Mommy?" Jess's small voice cut through the tension. She stood in the doorway, a hurried, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, eyes wide with fear. In that moment, seeing the terror on my daughter's face, I knew there was no turning back. "Get your backpack, sweetie," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "We're going on a little trip." Ethan lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "You're not going anywhere with my daughter." I wrenched free, adrenaline coursing through me. "Watch me." The next few minutes were a blur of action. I grabbed our packed bags, hustled Jess into the car, and peeled out of the driveway, Ethan's shouts fading behind us. As we drove to my parents' house, Jess's quiet voice broke the silence. "Are we leaving Daddy forever?" My heart clenched. "I don't know, sweetie, but I promise, everything will be okay." My parents welcomed us with open arms, their faces a mix of concern and relief. "We've been waiting for this day," my father said, hugging me tightly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and heated phone calls. Ethan, predictably, fought me every step of the way. He froze our joint accounts, threatened to ruin my career, even tried to turn my own parents against me with wild accusations. But I stood firm, drawing strength from Jess's slowly returning smile and the support of my family. Then came the day I'd been dreading. I arrived home from a meeting with my lawyer to find Ethan's car in my parents' driveway. Inside, I found him sitting with Jess, his charm turned up to full wattage. "There's my girls," he said smoothly, as if the past weeks hadn't happened. "I've been thinking, and I realize I may have been a bit harsh. Why don't we go home and work this out?" For a moment, I faltered. The old Emily, desperate for approval, almost gave in, but then I saw Jess, her body tense, eyes darting between us nervously. "No, Ethan," I said firmly. "We're not coming back. In fact," I took a deep breath, "I want a divorce." The charm vanished from his face, replaced by cold fury. "You'll regret this, Emily. I'll make sure you never see Jess again. You're nothing without me, remember that." As he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I'd done it. I'd stood up to him. But I knew this was just the beginning of a long, brutal fight. That night, as I tucked Jess into bed, she looked up at me with those innocent eyes. "Mommy, are you scared?" I hesitated, then nodded. "A little, sweetie. But being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." As I kissed her goodnight, I silently vowed to be the mother she deserved. No matter what battles lay ahead, the road would be tough, but for the first time in years, I felt hope blooming in my chest. We were free, and I was determined to keep it that way. The day Ethan and Sylvia showed up at my workplace, I knew something was terribly wrong. Their smug expressions sent chills down my spine. "Emily, dear," Sylvia purred, loud enough for my coworkers to hear, "we need to discuss your indiscretions." Before I could respond, Ethan thrust a photo into my hands. My heart stopped. It showed me apparently in an intimate embrace with a man I didn't recognize. The image was grainy, but unmistakably meant to be me. "How could you?" Ethan hissed, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Think of poor Jess." I stood there, stunned, as whispers erupted around me. My boss approached, concern etched on her face. "Emily, perhaps you should take the rest of the day off." Humiliated and confused, I fled the office. By the time I reached my parents' house, my phone was buzzing with messages from concerned friends and judgmental acquaintances. The photo had spread like wildfire. "This can't be happening," I sobbed to my father, showing him the picture. His eyes narrowed. "Something's not right here. Let me make a call." Days passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I couldn't leave the house without facing accusing stares. Jess came home from school in tears, having overheard cruel gossip about her mother. Then a breakthrough. My father's friend, a retired investigator, uncovered the truth. The photo was expertly manipulated, a composite of my face on someone else's body, and the source none other than Kathy, Ethan's sister. Armed with this information, I confronted Ethan and his family. The showdown took place in my parents' living room, tension thick in the air. "Did you really think you'd get away with this?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. Ethan scoffed. "Prove it." That's when my father's friend stepped forward, presenting irrefutable evidence of the photo manipulation and Kathy's involvement. The color drained from their faces. "How dare you?" I seethed, years of pent-up anger finally breaking free. "You've manipulated and abused me for years, and now this, all because I finally stood up for myself and Jess?" Sylvia attempted damage control. "Now, Emily, let's not be hasty." "No," I cut her off. "I'm done listening to you, all of you. You're toxic, manipulative people, and I won't let you hurt me or my daughter ever again." I turned to Ethan, meeting his gaze head-on. "I want full custody of Jess. You'll pay child support, but you'll stay away from us. If you fight this, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done." For the first time, I saw fear in Ethan's eyes. He knew he was beaten. In the weeks that followed, the truth came out. Ethan's reputation was in tatters, Sylvia became a social pariah, and Kathy faced legal consequences for her role in the deception. As for me, I held my head high, supported by those who stood by me and strengthened by the ordeal. Months later, as Jess and I settled into our new apartment, I reflected on how far we'd come. My career was back on track, with a promotion on the horizon. Jess was thriving in her new school, her artwork proudly displayed on our fridge without fear of criticism. "Mommy," Jess said one evening as I tucked her in, "are you happy now?" I smiled, truly smiled, for what felt like the first time in years. "Yes, sweetie, we both are." As I closed her door, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was stronger, wiser, and finally free. The road hadn't been easy, and I knew there would be challenges ahead. But I was ready to face them, on my own terms. I had reclaimed my life, my identity, and my future, and in doing so, I'd given Jess the greatest gift of all: a mother who was whole, happy, and fiercely protective of the life we'd built together. The Emily who had once been lost in Ethan's shadow was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced her demons, fought for her child, and emerged victorious. As I looked out the window at the city lights, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Whatever came next, I knew we could handle it. Together, Jess and I were unstoppable. "You lying, cheating fraud!" Marla's shrill accusation echoed through my cell phone. I stared in disbelief at the unknown number lighting up my screen, frozen in place on my living room carpet. "Excuse me?" I finally managed, completely blindsided by the verbal assault from my husband's sister, who I barely knew. "Don't play dumb with me," she seethed. "I have proof you embezzled over $200,000 from my father's company. Did you really think no one would find out?" I sank slowly to the floor as her rant continued, my pulse racing. Embezzlement? What was she talking about? I racked my brain, trying to make sense of the allegations. Sure, I had been helping out a little more with my father-in-law Leonard's struggling financial firm lately, ever since I married Eli 6 months ago. But steal money? "Marla, I honestly have no idea what you mean," I pleaded into the receiver. "There must be some misunderstanding." She cut me off sharply. "Oh, I understand perfectly, and if you think you're getting away with this, you're dead wrong. I'm calling my lawyer and the police, and I swear you'll pay." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in stunned disbelief, Marla's accusations echoing in my mind. Embezzlement? Police? It made no sense. How could she think I was capable of such a thing? My hands shook as I dialed Eli. Desperate to make sense of this madness, it went straight to voicemail. I hung up, remembering with a sinking feeling that he was on a business trip. I was alone, facing Marla's bizarre allegations without anyone on my side. Over the next hour I paced the house, dread and confusion swirling inside me. I knew I had done nothing wrong, but I had no idea how to prove it, or why Marla would make such extreme accusations against me. We barely knew each other. Why would she be targeting me like this? I didn't have to wonder much longer. My phone buzzed with a text from Eli's cousin Jane asking if I was going to Leonard's 80th birthday barbecue that weekend. My heart sank further. If Marla was going to come after me for supposed embezzlement, what better place to confront me than in front of the whole family? I toyed with staying home, not wanting to face public humiliation, but I knew avoiding her would make me look guilty. No, I had to stand up to Marla's outrageous accusations, for myself and my marriage. My hands still shook as I dressed for Leonard's party that Saturday. I chose a conservative navy dress, not wanting to give Marla any more ammunition against me. As I drove to Leonard's sprawling estate, my nerves mounted, but I refused to be intimidated. I had done nothing wrong, and I would make Marla see that, even if I had to do it in front of all the relatives. The party was already in full swing when I arrived. Leonard beamed when he saw me, enfolding me in a warm hug. "Callie, so glad you could make it," he enthused. "Can you believe I'm this old?" I smiled weakly, wishing I could actually focus on celebrating with him. But out of the corner of my eye I saw Marla across the lawn, a smug look on her face as she watched me. My stomach tightened. This was it. Time to face her venom. Drawing a shaky breath, I steeled myself and marched across the grass directly toward her. She raised one eyebrow as I approached, her expression cold. Before I could open my mouth, she grabbed a microphone off a nearby table, tapping it loudly to get everyone's attention. "Sorry to interrupt, but I have an important announcement about the guest of honor's daughter-in-law," she said loudly. Everyone turned, curiosity mixing with surprise at her imperious tone. "Callie here," she continued, glaring at me while gesturing theatrically in my direction. has stolen over $200 from the family. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. I stood frozen, mouth agape, as all eyes fixed on me with disbelief and suspicion. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Marla, what is going on?" Eli demanded, rushing forward to stand between us. I blinked back grateful tears at the sight of my husband, though his forehead was etched with confusion. "Yeah, what the hell, Marla?" someone else shouted. A nervous murmur rippled through the guests. My knees shook as I grasped Eli's hand like a lifeline. Marla raised her palms, her eyes cold. "I received an anomaly notice from the family company's bank last week. When I investigated, I discovered systematic transfers from the business account straight into Callie's personal coffers." "That can't be true," I implored to the crowd, finding my voice. "I would never steal anything, especially not from family." "That's funny, because I have bank records showing otherwise," Marla spat. "And it didn't take much digging to realize the transfers coincided precisely with Callie's arrival." She crossed her arms smugly. Blood roared in my ears. This couldn't be happening. Eli squeezed my hand, brows furrowed. "Clearly there's been some kind of mix-up. Let's sit down and look at these supposed records. I'm sure Callie can explain." "A mix-up?" Marla retorted. "You really believe your wife over your own sister? The proof is right here in black and white." She waved papers in the air as indignant murmurs spread through the guests. My eyes flooded with tears. Was Eli really doubting me too? "Hey, let's not make assumptions until we have all the facts," our cousin William interjected reasonably. Some family members mumbled agreement. Maybe the bank made an error? "The bank didn't embezzle 200 grand. She did," Marla shouted, stabbing a finger at me. Several relatives nodded, casting suspicious looks my way. Mortified tears spilled down my cheeks. This couldn't be real. Suddenly, Leonard stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. Though frail, his voice rang clear. "I know my daughter-in-law. Callie is innocent," he declared. A few family members applauded. My tears morphed to gratitude for my father-in-law's faith in me, though an anxious pit still churned in my stomach. "What proof did I actually have?" Marla only scoffed. "You're a foolish old man to trust her over evidence. That gold-digging fraud married Eli for access to our accounts." An electric fury coursed through me. The stress, confusion, and Marla's public attacks ignited my anger. Yes, Marla clearly hated me, though I hardly knew her. But why make such drastic accusations? What was her end goal? Before I could respond, she snatched her cell phone from her fancy designer purse, stabbing aggressively at the screen. "That's it," she snapped. "I'm calling the cops." Fear and adrenaline surged through my veins. This harassment had gone too far. Just then, Eli grabbed Marla's phone from her hand, ending the call she had started. Marla's mouth dropped in indignation. A tense hush fell over the audience. "I think we all need to take a beat and calmly gather the facts," Eli stated evenly, though I detected a slight tremble in his voice. He drew me close, and I clung tightly to him, struggling to control the sobs rising in my throat. "Let's reconvene tomorrow after I've had time to carefully examine these bank statements, and Callie can explain her records," Eli continued. "I'm confident we can resolve this without getting the police involved." I exhaled, beyond grateful for Eli's level-headed intervention. Maybe he did still believe in my innocence, after all. But as I glanced around at the circle of relatives, I only saw skepticism and distrust in their eyes. This ambush might just be the beginning of Marla's rampage, and I had to find a way to convince everyone of the truth before she destroyed my entire world. The war had only just begun. The next weeks crept by in agonizing slow motion. Marla's public accusations spawned whispers that plagued me each time I ventured into town. The hairdresser, the grocer, even our neighbors cast furtive glances my way. At home, tension crackled in the air. Eli burrowed himself reviewing reams of financial statements, desperate to reconcile the anomalies Marla uncovered. Though he tried to hide it, I spotted doubt flickering in his eyes whenever we spoke. Meanwhile, we had temporarily moved into Leonard's sprawling estate to care for him after his cancer diagnosis. But with each passing day under the same roof as Marla, the knot in my stomach tightened. She seized every opportunity to berate me, even slamming doors in my face. I jumped each time her shrill voice echoed down the cavernous halls. Leonard's health visibly deteriorated under the constant conflict until he stopped leaving his room at all. One evening, as I prepared Leonard's dinner tray, I overheard Marla's strident tones from the hall. I paused, a glass of orange juice frozen in my hand. Callie clearly convinced you to put her name on your will and give her healthcare power so she can manipulate your money while you're vulnerable from chemo, Marla accused. My mouth fell open in dismay. Were her attacks now extending to how I cared for my dying father-in-law? Really, Marla, must you always assume the worst about Callie? Leonard replied warily. I asked her to help me get my documents in order, because I trust her. You're making a huge mistake trusting that deceitful money-grabber over your own family, Marla retorted. I stormed down the hall before I even made the conscious decision, too incensed to hold my tongue a second longer. How dare you undermine how I care for Leonard, I confronted her, slamming the tray onto the table. Orange juice sloshed over the edge of the glass. Questioning my role as power of attorney when I've done nothing but dedicate myself to this family is despicable, even for you, I spat. Marla straightened to her full height, mere inches taller than my petite frame. But she seemed to tower over me now with righteous indignation flaming in her eyes. You manipulated your way into this family's good graces with dew eyes and sweet talk, so you could get your hands on Leonard's fortune, she hissed, stepping toward me. But you won't get away with it as long as I'm here protecting what's rightfully mine. Suddenly her accusations clicked into place with startling clarity. This had never been about me at all. It was about securing her own inheritance. My chest swelled with outrage. Is that what this whole smear campaign is about? I demanded. Discrediting me so you get Leonard's money? Marla scoffed. It's only smear if it's not the truth. But go ahead, play the victim. We'll see who Leonard believes when I show him proof of your late-night cash withdrawals dopping straight into your personal shopping funds. My hands clenched at my sides, so that was her new angle? I had to nip this sabotage in the bud. You planted bogus evidence to make me look guilty so you could wrestle away control, I accused. Admit this is all a ploy before you cause real damage. Marla stepped forward until she loomed over me, close enough for me to smell her floral perfume. Her glare pierced my soul. The only damage being done here is you bleeding my family dry through your deceit, but I will expose you, if it's the last thing I do, she vowed. A chill slithered down my spine at the cold conviction in her tone. She swept from the room before I could summon any defense. I sank into a chair, heart pounding against my ribs. This confirmed Marla wouldn't stop her personal vendetta until she achieved her nefarious goal. I had to act fast to protect myself and Eli from her intricate manipulations. But I feared too much harm had already been done. The web of lies she spun seemed too thick to permeate. If I didn't find a way to prove myself soon, I risked losing everything. My fists clenched with determination. I refused to let Marla win. Over the next week I became restless, unable to shake Marla's threat. Her web of lies seemed on the verge of choking the life from me and my marriage. I had to fight back. Late one night after everyone else went to bed, I crept into Leonard's dusty home office. Moonlight filtered through the windows as I rifled through the heavy wooden desk. There had to be some record here of the family company's actual financial records I could leverage to defend myself. The air felt thick and oppressive as I sifted through endless papers by the dim glow of my phone flashlight. Dust motes danced through the thin beams like ghosts of the past. I suppressed a cough, anxious not to wake anyone. Come on, I muttered under my breath, files blurring together in the darkness. Just when I was about ready to give up, a thick manila folder wedged at the back of a drawer caught my eye. I opened it carefully, immediately recognizing Leonard's distinctive scrawl. It appeared to be records detailing financial transfers related to an offshore company set up as a small tax shelter. Everything seemed perfectly legal at first glance, until I realized with a jolt that the shelter had recently been dissolved right before the accusations against me began. I scanned the documents feverishly, compelled forward by intuition. Pay dirt. Black and white records showing a significant cash deposit into a new account just before the offshore entity dissolved. My blood turned to ice as I saw the listed owner, Marla. Frantically, I shuffled through more records, eventually finding a bank statement detailing a 7-figure cash withdrawal from the family business's primary account, more than triple what I supposedly embezzled. It trickled into numerous smaller accounts before eventually accumulating in Marla's offshore fund. I rocked back onto my heels, hands trembling around the damning evidence. This proved without doubt that Marla had manufactured bogus accusations against me to conceal her own enormous theft. Fury coursed through me. Thanks to her tall tales, I endured weeks of public humiliation and deteriorating faith from my husband and father-in-law. Meanwhile, she was quietly siphoning enough money to set herself up for life. It made me physically ill. Just then, I noticed smaller subsequent withdrawals from the family accounts in the months since. My rage ignited exponentially when I realized the implications. Even after building her own offshore fortune, Marla continued bleeding the family funds dry out of pure spite and greed. By now, grief intermingled with my anger. Eli and I once shared dreams of taking over the struggling family business, restoring it to prosperity. But if Marla's embezzlement continued unchecked, bankruptcy loomed perilously close. We stood to lose everything because of her insatiable avarice. Well, not if I had anything to do with it. Foreboding determination solidified my resolve. I would protect this family from financial ruin, no matter the consequences. Carefully replacing the records, I crept back upstairs nursing the glimmer of a plan. Yet just as I reached my bedroom, muffled sobs gave me pause. I turned to see Eli slumped on our couch, face buried in his hands. My heart wrenched at his pain. I started to call out when he began speaking aloud in a broken tone. "I swore till death do us part," he choked. "But how can I protect our vows if I don't even know who I married?" My voice froze in my throat as his despair pierced my soul. He truly doubted me now, unsure what was illusion and truth after so many vicious lies. Vulnerable as a child, my formidable husband crumbled under the weight of Marla's schemes. I yearned to rush forward and wrap my arms around him, to reaffirm my loyalty and unwavering devotion so we could unite to defeat Marla's treachery. But my window to comfort Eli closed abruptly when Marla herself suddenly stormed from the shadows. "Don't torture yourself any longer defending that backstabbing fraud," she admonished him coldly. "I warned you Callie only cares about herself. Now let's discuss removing her from the will before she steals you blind too." I barely stifled my outraged gasp, shrinking back before Marla spotted me. Boiling fury overwhelmed any remains of sorrow. This confirmed Marla wouldn't stop her personal vendetta until she achieved her nefarious goal. It was time to turn the tables and make her pay. I refused to let her win. Morning dawned gloomy and gray, matching my mood. I wandered the garden still reeling from the revelations of the previous night. Though fury continued simmering in my veins, one stark truth emerged. I couldn't defeat Marla alone. Her schemes created an impenetrable fortress no one dared question. No, to topple her web of lies, I needed reinforcements. I sank onto a cold concrete bench, formulating the kernel of a plan. A potential ally came to mind. Hazel, Leonard's estranged former assistant. She resigned in protests after Leonard overlooked her for a promotion in favor of Marla years before. Hazel's inside knowledge could prove invaluable ammunition. After digging around, I managed to track down her contact information. My hands shook slightly dialing her number that afternoon. "Hazel? It's Callie," I started tentatively when she answered. I took a deep breath. "I apologize for the out-of-the-blue call, but I desperately need your help." I expected hesitation or outright refusal, but Hazel readily agreed to meet at a quiet cafe the next morning. I arrived early the following day, nerves and anticipation roiling inside me. When Hazel entered right on time, bearing 2 steaming cups of coffee, I sighed in relief. This felt meant to be. Hazel's sharp eyes softened with sympathy as I unloaded the entire sordid tale. Her lips pressed thin at the mention of Marla's name. "I'm so sorry you got dragged into that family's dysfunction," she said, shaking her head. "When Leonard picked Marla over me for VP, I swore one day her greed would be her downfall." I leaned forward intently. "So you're not surprised by her embezzlement accusations?" Hazel scoffed. "Not one bit. She always resented Leonard's fortune while believing herself entitled to it. I tried warning him for years, but he remained blind to her self-serving nature." My pulse quickened. "So you believe she could be capable of setting me up?" I dared ask. Hazel nodded firmly. "Absolutely. She always despised perceived rivals. With you as a new threat, I guarantee she'd target you to get what she wants." Hope unfurled inside me, hearing Hazel validate my suspicions. Perhaps I wasn't battling Marla alone after all. I described finding records proving Marla siphoned family money overseas for years. Hazel confirmed witnessing odd financial transactions during her tenure, but hadn't pieced together the pattern at the time. I knew something dishonest was happening right under Leonard's nose, Hazel revealed, anger glinting in her eyes. But I never managed to catch concrete proof before Marla turned Leonard against me. My mind raced, connecting dots. With Hazel's inside context combined with the evidence I uncovered, we suddenly held all the puzzle pieces necessary to expose Marla's schemes. I met Hazel's determined gaze. "Will you help me convince Leonard and Eli of the truth?" I implored. "With our knowledge combined, we can finally prove Marla's been playing everyone this whole time." Hazel straightened, resolve stealing her expression. "I'm all in. Marla destroyed my career and reputation. It's time for some justice." We plotted late into the afternoon. Hazel agreed to discreetly dig for more evidence of Marla's embezzlement over the years. Meanwhile, I would pry deeper into the dissolved tax shelters, hopeful more clues awaited somewhere. It felt intoxicating, finally strategizing a counteroffensive. As we parted ways outside the cafe, Hazel grasped my hands, compassion in her eyes. "Stay strong, Callie," she urged. "With perseverance, the truth prevails. You'll restore your good name, I'm certain of it." I blinked back grateful tears as I embraced her. With Hazel by my side, the future seemed a little less bleak than the night before. I didn't have to withstand Marla's torment alone anymore. Empowered by new camaraderie, I drove home with my head held high, refusing to shed another tear over Marla's schemes. She spun an artful web to discredit me, yes. But united with Hazel, we would gather enough evidence to dismantle her lies once and for all. Justice would soon have its day. Over the next few weeks, Hazel and I discreetly gathered evidence. She uncovered financial statements showing odd transfers, coinciding with Marla's promotions over the years. I dug deeper into the offshore accounts, tracing money trails leading right back to Marla. Piece by piece, our proof grew damning. Marla embezzled under the guise of legitimacy at every opportunity, bleeding funds to fuel her gilded lifestyle. Meanwhile, she schemed to undermine me, the lone barrier between her and total control. Armed with reams of records, Hazel and I decided to confront Marla and Leonard at the upcoming quarterly board meeting. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown. I dressed carefully that morning in a polished sheath dress, armor for the battle ahead. Hazel met me outside the conference room, files clutched in her steady hands, eyes brimming with vindication. "Ready?" I asked with a bracing smile. She squeezed my arm encouragingly. We entered together as equals, spines straightened in solidarity. I held Marla's glare evenly as we took seats across the heavy oak table. Shock registered briefly on her haughty features at the sight of her old rival, but she quickly arranged her face in a patronizing smile. "Hazel, what an unexpected surprise," she purred, venom subtly lacing her syrupy tone. "I thought we parted ways years ago. But no matter." "I asked her to come," I interjected coolly, relishing knocking her off balance. "I want reliable witnesses for this discussion." Marla scowled as murmurs rippled around the room. Leonard rapped his gavel. "Let's begin, shall we?" Oblivious to the undercurrents, he led the meeting through standard business items. I barely listened, watching Marla fidget with her ostentatious jewels. She likely assumed I invited Hazel merely for emotional support. Well, she would soon learn otherwise. Finally, Leonard adjourned the budget approvals. "Any other items before we wrap?" he asked mildly. I met Hazel's gaze, stealing my nerve. "Showtime." "Yes, actually." My voice rang clear in the sudden silence. All eyes shifted to me as I rose slowly, smoothing my skirt with a steady hand. I stepped forward, shoulders back, confidence rooting me firmly to the ground. Hazel handed me a document. I flipped it open, facing the group. "As you can see in this financial statement from a now dissolved offshore account, large sums consistently went missing from family company funds over several years." Murmurs swelled as I continued, laying out transfer records, holding nothing back. Piece by irrefutable piece, we outlined Marla's elaborate embezzlement scheme going back over a decade. By the time I slapped the last document on the table, you could hear a pin drop. I surveyed the room, vindicated by the appalled and stunned expressions. But Marla only scoffed, disrupting the taut silence. Honestly, Callie, implicating me to distract from your own crimes is pathetic, she scolded. My fury spiked. How dare she still feign innocence with hard evidence stacked against her? But Hazel subtly shook her head before I could erupt. She was right. I had to stay calm and definitive for my case to convince. I folded my hands neatly. The proof is all here. Hazel and I traced every withdrawal, every transfer authorized by your signature to siphon family funds. I speared Marla with an icy stare. The only question is why, and how much more before you bankrupted us all? A tense pause swelled. I glimpsed doubt flickering behind Eli's stoic expression. The others seemed to hold their breath, stunned by the unexpected drama. This was it, my one shot to break Marla's facade wide open. Suddenly, Marla shoved back her chair with an ear-piercing screech. "This is ridiculous!" She stabbed an accusatory finger my direction, every ounce of her composure vanishing. "That conniving fraud hunted through private records to falsely implicate me, and you're all blindly going along with it." She swiveled toward Leonard, features taut with desperation. "Father, please, listen to reason." "No," Leonard bellowed. We all jumped at his sudden ferocity. He rose slowly, knuckles white where he gripped the table's edge. When he lifted blazing eyes to Marla, any hint of frailty burned away. "It is you who has strayed from reason," he decreed. His gravelly voice resonated with conviction. "The evidence is clear. You betrayed this family's trust for the last time." Marla's mouth opened and closed like a fish struggling for air. I watched, barely breathing, as her web of lies crumbled around her. "You can't actually believe this absurd setup," she blustered, gaze darting wildly between us all. But she no longer appeared the commanding tycoon, just a desperate, broken woman with nowhere left to hide. "The proof makes your guilt abundantly clear," Leonard pronounced. "You drained company accounts we depended on to fund your extravagant shopping sprees, thinking no one would ever catch on." His voice dripped disgust. "But justice doesn't sleep forever." "But I was securing our future," Marla burst out, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Little Miss Innocent was bleeding us dry behind your back. I had to take control." "By robbing me blind?" Leonard thundered. I jumped, stunned by his atypical fury. He advanced on Marla where she quailed against the wall. Your hubris and selfishness knew no limits, but no more. Spittle flew as he shouted. "You are hereby stripped of all authority in this company, effective immediately." A chorus of astonished murmurs rippled around the room. My pulse pounded as his words sank in. We did it. We finally exposed Marla's web of deceit. She would face consequences at last. Marla gaped, skin fading to a ghostly pallor. For a split second, I almost felt pity for her distress. Then I remembered weeks of torment I endured thanks to her lies. No, she deserved every bit of this downfall. Justice was finally served. Suddenly Marla erupted again, venom blazing as she faced the stunned group. "You fools! That backstabbing fraud deceived you all because she wants my birthright for herself." She jabbed a shaking finger at Hazel and I. "These money-hungry snakes conspired to bring me down out of pure jealous spite, and you ate up every poisonous lie." She swiveled accusingly toward Eli where he sat stunned. "Surely you won't let them dismantle our family, brother?" she pleaded desperately. "You know I would never betray you this way." All eyes shifted to Eli. He just stared, jaw clenched tight, assessing Marla like he'd never seen her before. I held my breath, realizing though I won the battle with evidence, Eli's faith in me still dangled by a fragile thread. If he sided with Marla now, her schemes might succeed, tearing us apart for good. After an endless pause, Eli slowly stood. Marla's lips parted hopefully. The room seemed to swelter in the tense silence. Finally, Eli stepped toward me, resolve etching his handsome features. He took my hands tenderly in his. Behind him, Marla released a shattered gasp. "Forgive me for ever questioning your virtue," Eli implored, regret shining in his eyes. "In one day, you proved yourself more honest and loyal than my own sister in a lifetime." Overwhelmed with relief, I let out a strangled sob. Eli pulled me into his strong embrace. I clung to him, tears spilling down my cheeks. Murmurs of approval rippled around us. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Leonard place a gentle hand on Hazel's shoulder in gratitude, her lips curled into a satisfied smile. The tender moment broke abruptly with Marla's enraged shriek. "You spineless fools! I sacrificed everything for this family!" She grabbed wildly for a paperweight on the desk. I pulled Eli protectively behind me, but before Marla could hurl the makeshift weapon, 2 security guards burst through the doors, summoned by the receptionist after overhearing Marla's meltdown. They wrestled her away, still screaming threats and obscenities as she struggled violently in their grip. We all stood frozen, shocked by the deranged scene, as Marla was dragged away in handcuffs, spit flying, makeup smeared beyond recognition. The heavy doors swung slowly closed behind the guards, sealing her fate. Stunned silence swelled. It was over. My pounding heart gradually steadied as sweet relief coursed through me. I turned slowly to Eli, joy and gratitude welling inside me like a healing balm. With Marla gone, justice served and relationships mended, the future gleamed brightly for us all. In the weeks following Marla's dramatic downfall, the family company steadily regained its footing. With Marla gone and the missing funds recovered, hope cautiously reawakened for a prosperous future. Meanwhile, details emerged about Marla's schemes that made me ill. She not only embezzled riches into secret accounts, but took out exorbitant loans in the family business's name to fund her lavish globetrotting lifestyle. No wonder insolvency loomed so close. With the extent of the betrayal clear, Leonard filed charges ensuring Marla answered fully for her crimes. The last we heard, she faced over a decade behind bars. I can't pretend I didn't feel some satisfaction hearing that news after all the damage she caused. On a personal level, Eli and I focused on rebuilding intimacy after so much erosion of trust. We took long evening strolls together, talking openly like newlyweds again. Eli even discussed taking on a larger leadership role in the company once more. Hearing his enthusiasm reawakened my hopes of one day standing proudly by his side as his partner. Meanwhile, Eli and Leonard welcomed Hazel back wholeheartedly upon realizing how invaluable her expertise could prove. They offered her an executive role, heading up financial operations, which she accepted with smug satisfaction. I didn't blame her for reveling in the moment. Marla denied her the credit she deserved for too long. As for me, when Eli asked what I planned to do career-wise now that the dust settled, I surprised myself with my answer. The idea came to me suddenly. Why not take my recent education in combating corporate fraud to help others? With some training, I could establish myself as an independent financial crimes consultant. So I enrolled in specialized college courses by day, while spending evenings discussing potential business strategies with Eli over home-cooked dinners. After so much turmoil, our household brimmed with possibilities for the future again. One sunny afternoon about 2 months later, relaxed laughter drew me out to the veranda where I discovered Eli and Leonard chatting animatedly over paperwork bearing the company logo. They both glanced up with easy smiles as I approached. "Pull up a chair, darling?" Eli greeted me vibrantly. "We were just discussing ideas for expanding the international sales division you proposed. Leonard thinks your concept shows real vision." I blinked, surprised and touched. He not only recalled that late-night conversation weeks ago, but took my ambitions seriously. Eli gently tugged me down between them. "With Hazel stabilizing finances, I can shift focus to strategic growth initiatives," he explained. "And I was hoping you might spearhead market research for Eastern European expansion?" My brows shot up as I swiveled toward Leonard. He regarded me steadily over his glasses. "It was sharp thinking on your part to identify those emerging economies," he noted. "You have precisely the savvy and grit needed to pioneer new territory." I shook my head in wonder. In the depths of desperation mere months ago, I never imagined rising to such a critical role in the family company. But Hazel was right. Perseverance through hardship bore sweeter fruit in the end. "We make quite a team." Eli's eyes twinkled with affection as he lifted his glass. "To new beginnings." Leonard and I both echoed the toast, smiling as we clinked our glasses in unity again after so much division. Staring into their uplifted, hopeful faces, my heart swelled with joyful gratitude. Marla sought to destroy this family and all we built together out of petty jealousy. But ultimately, we emerged wiser and closer for having weathered the stormy test. As we sipped the sweet, chilled wine, a sense of peace descended over me. The future brimmed with light and possibility, personally and professionally. All was well again at last.